Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the NARM Training Institute. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. Hi, Transforming Trauma listeners. Do you want to join the international NARM community in support of trauma-informed care? If so, please consider joining us to become trained in the neuroaffective relational model. We are excited to offer 2 starting levels of professional trainings designed to support those of you working with clients or populations dealing with the effects of adverse childhood experiences and complex trauma. The Level 1 online NARM Basics training is a psychoeducational training designed for helping professionals in a variety of fields, such as mental health professionals, substance abuse counselors, educators, doctors, nurses, other healthcare providers, coaches, and more. The Level 2 NARM Therapist training is a comprehensive clinical training designed for licensed mental health professionals, as well as current mental health graduate students and clinical interns and trainees. For more information on these NARM trainings and to apply, please visit www.narmtraining.com/schedule. And now for our interview. Dr. Albert Wong is a leading clinician and educator in the field of somatics. A Marshall Scholar educated at Princeton and Oxford, he also served as residential staff at the Esalen Institute for 5 years. Dr. Wong has been honored for his work in psychotherapy by the American Psychological Association Psychoanalytic Division, the Northern California Community for Emotionally Focused Therapy, and the Yale Psychoanalytic Research Training Program. Dr. Wong has been featured on PBS, Time Magazine, and his work has been published in titles ranging from the scientific journal Biological Cybernetics to the book anthology Radical Spirit. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Albert Wong. Okay, I'm sitting here with Dr. Albert Wong. Albert, thank you so much for joining us on Transforming Trauma.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. We usually start this show with the question, like we would a NARM session. So I'd like to ask you, what is it that you would like our listeners to get out of our conversation today?
You know, I think there's a lot of different people who might be listening to this podcast. I think it's great that it's kind of extends out to such a wide range. I guess for people who are what I would call in the hurting stage of trauma, I would want them just to feel that there is hope, right? That there is potentially a way out, that you're not alone, that whatever it is that you're experiencing, it doesn't last forever, and that there is a way to make it through this kind of dark night of the soul, the challenges that we have probably, many of us in this field have struggled with in terms of contending with whatever it is that has happened to us, right? That even if you've experienced trauma, it doesn't have to define you, and that you can make it through, and that there is help. Things like this, right?
Yeah.
Kind of that this might be a little beacon of light for those of you who need a little bit of a guidepost. I guess for those people who are kind of struggling a little bit in the darkness, that maybe this would be a little ray of hope, a light, and maybe a little bit of a message. You're not alone. And I guess because I know there's a range of folks, like, I guess for people who are maybe kind of making their way through, or kind of feel like they're a little bit further out on the other side, maybe just some kind of ideas about how to think about helping each other, right? Helping others, right? Kind of along the way, right? And maybe that side of things too. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, that's a great place to start. Thank you.
Yeah.
So
sure.
I told you before I pressed record that I've been following your work for some years. I was so excited that you were joining us on the show. And so I wondered if you could just tell us, in your words, tell us about your work in the field and in the field of trauma.
So I come, I think, from the tradition of the Esalen Institute, which is this magical place in Big Sur, California. And it's surprising how many of the greats within somatic psychotherapy really travel through that terrain. Peter Levine was the director of education there for a while. Dan Siegel, kind of some of his initial books kind of came through there. And also, one of my traditions is Gestalt, which I know Larry Heller kind of derives from. And so Gestalt really kind of landed in the U.S. at Esalen. And so I think a part of my work really arrives via the Esalen Institute and this kind of spirit of deep embodied listening, valuing the wisdom of the body, the notion of somatic experience and what it's like to tune in to whatever's incomplete or unfinished in the body that longs to be resolved or completed. So I think a lot of my work originally derives kind of from my experience and training at the Esalen Institute. And then I think there's also a spirit of approach, I hope is my small little contribution to the field, but it's really kind of in the lineage of Esalen. There's this spirit of nobody captures the flag, right? So there's this, Esalen was this place of this grand carnival of humanity and teachings, and it was an amazing place. It's like people who were like the best and the brightest and the most heartful teachers throughout the world come through. And but there was this ethos of no one captures the flag, because there were so many. I think when people build up schools and all that, right, there's a like, I have the flag, right? My flag is the flag, right? And people wanting to assemble people. And I think it takes a certain kind of courage to found your own kind of institute or school or whatever. And so I think that it makes sense that people would do that. But I think one of my at least efforts or intentions within the field writ large is to try and kind of help everybody get along, right? And help everybody see how things fit together, right? So I think, and I'm so tickled that you follow my work, but I always feel like I'm following everybody else, right? I'm just trying to kind of gather us together, right? Okay, somatic experiencing is important. NARM is important, right? Kind of sensory motor, Hakomi, right? Kind of all of these modalities, EMDR, like all of these, it's like we can all we don't have to be kind of disassociated ourselves, right? Kind of there's a way in which the field itself doesn't have to be kind of fragmented. There's a potential for deeper integration, for deeper kind of connectedness in that way too. I think we don't have to be in our whatever, right, kind of self-identifications. We can take what's good within us and then also try and find ways in which we blend and connect with each other. So I think that, I guess in terms of my, I don't know if and it's funny to think of myself, I always still feel a little bit surprised that, maybe I'm making some contributions, but if I'm making a contribution to the field, I think it might be a little of that. I sometimes I feel hesitant because, like, gosh, some of my students are saying, you should talk more about this. You should talk more about this. But like, do we really need another darn acronym? Like, so sometimes I think like, gosh, should I do, but I think so. So I think I think that might be a little bit of a contribution. Maybe, I guess one other contribution, I think different people kind of make these kinds of contributions, but one of the things which I intend to do, at least in the work, is to try and bring a layer of like letting myself be relationally vulnerable as well, right? Because I think sometimes there can be a kind of I'm the teacher, you're the student, and
right.
And the idea of we're co-creating whatever it is that we're in, right? So I think that's a level or layer that's present, and in which I want to kind of champion and almost, I hold my place of importance, but only kind of, it's like I'm only when students seem to like me, and they always seem to. Like, I guess I try and hold it on behalf of them, right? So that they can find it, find the goodness that's in them, right? Yeah. So, yeah. But I think those are some of the things that I've maybe contributed to the field. And it's, thank you for tracking me and thinking that there's value. Yeah.
Yeah. So you named something that, I feel is really important. And I know many of us here in the NARM community feel is important. And that is really like this co-creative, collaborative way that we can all be in connection and bring our different ways of coming to the field. So that's really beautiful. I love that you named that. And then, so I'm wondering how, because as I'm having these conversations, there's kind of many different ways to hold and talk about trauma. So I'm curious how do you hold that term, and how would you, if you had to define it, how would you define the idea of complex trauma?
Well, not all trauma is created equal, right? Because there's some trauma is, not one and done, but like it's a little bit more, it's less intricately kind of devastating, right? There's a way in which certain kinds of trauma are hard to kind of navigate our way around and find our way through, right? Like you have stuff like, okay, I mean, and not to say that car accidents or like specific shock trauma is not complex, because that can be very difficult or challenging. But I think there's something specifically painful or hard or difficult to extricate yourself from when the trauma happens in the kind of relational sphere, when the one who hurts you is one who you love. And I think in classic, and I call it maybe first generation somatics, right? There's kind of less of a notion of the relationality or the damage that can happen from kind of trauma that happens not just to you, but almost from somebody who lives inside you in a certain way, right? Because it's almost like kind of, okay, there's the harm that happens to you, and okay, that's awful enough, but then maybe there's a place to go to, or people to connect to, or loved ones who you kind of can return to and embrace and help you survive through what is horrible, right? But when the one who hurts you is one who lives inside your heart in a certain way, and you hold almost embedded as part of your being, it's almost like that hurt explodes inside your being, and it's like being blown up from the inside, not just the outside, and not just that, right? It's almost like your sense of being and self kind of explodes internally. But then like all of the things that you know yourself to be, like in connection with that person, kind of disappear. And then the ability to reach out for love or support, especially if they've been one to whom that has been a historical component, is like, okay, you're blown up from the inside, and then like left alone kind of to your own devices on the outside. And it's just kind of being at sea, kind of without your ship, kind of everything's falling apart and no way home. So it makes it so much more challenging and difficult for people and a therapist, clinician, coach, whoever, right? Somebody who's trying to support kind of to navigate through, because there's the kind of internal explosion then. And then as you try, if you're the clinician, therapist, coach, practitioner, whatever, to support, and you're kind of starting to try and be that holding environment, trying to be that safe person, trying to reconstitute that person's support system or help them internalize you as a safe person. It's like all of the warning signals of danger, right? I've trusted before, but been exploded, from the inside before. I've tried to say no kind of before, or I've tried, so it becomes really challenging, problematic. So yeah, it's difficult.
Wow. You talk about that. That's such a powerful way of thinking of it. I've never thought of it like that. Someone that like lives in your heart and you explode from the inside from the trauma. And that's a really powerful way. And it feels true. Like that's what it feels like, right? Like we're kind of exploding from the inside. So I appreciate that way of talking about it.
Almost just to say, I feel like the way that you listened helped me speak it. Right. It's fascinating, right? Because actually I was thinking about it, but I've never spoken it exactly like that before. So thank you for helping me find the words together. Us find the words together. Yeah.
Oh, let's find the words together.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's that co-creative piece that you mentioned. Yeah. Oh, I love that. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm even more curious, how you came to the field. So I know a little bit, you talked a little bit about your background. So what brought you to the field? And you can get as personal or however you want. But I'd love to hear.
No, thank you for the delicacy and the inquiry and the importance of the question, right? I think for many of us in this field, the field matters because it matters in our lives, right? That we've had experiences that we've lived through, and in our own ways, we've tried to come out the other side. Sometimes we have, sometimes we're in the midst of it. But there's always a little bit of a personal kind of way through, right? And that's certainly true for me. I mean, in many ways, and I'm grateful for the way I was kind of raised, brought up, and I think it's hard to be in the midst of kind of an immigrant family with its own versions of trauma that's inherited from kind of war-torn countries and dramatic family rupture, right? People who you love, who you cannot be with, kind of anger and suffering that reveals itself through, I don't know, just all sorts of unknown, unintended, but sometimes really challenging and painful consequence. And so growing up, I was grateful to have a lot of love around me, and there was a lot of unspoken and unmetabolized trauma, right? Just heartbreaking, gut-wrenching things that happened within our family system, our family structure, that played itself out in, I guess in a NARM language, like certain kind of pride-based kind of defenses, right? There's certain ways in which kind of that was an attempt to survive the shame of inadequacy, of the inability to save people in the family who we couldn't save, and then just a lot of over control. But so there are definitely kind of moments where kind of trauma echoed its way into my life, seeing things and having experienced things that it's just kids shouldn't, we wouldn't want kids to experience those things, and being grateful to have enough capacity from kind of the growing up to find our way or my way through, right? To grow up and just feel like enough wherewithal to come out the other side. I think there are certain moments where, like, my life was very kind of programmed to follow in my father's footsteps. I think there was a way in which that was the way to survive. That was the way to be safe, is to basically become kind of molded in terms of my father's image and his eyes. And there were very kind of, very, very specific understandings about how that should happen and why that should happen. And there was an adoption of those kinds of instructions. And so there was this kind of going to college where he went to college and, studying with some of the same professors and winning some of the same awards. And, so it was very eerie kind of almost identification with that kind of life in that world. And then at some point feeling, wait, is this me? Right? Is this me? And so there's a way in which the pain of not becoming who I am or who I was, right, like, was too great. And I found my way to the Esalen Institute, where thankfully kind of there was the support and the holding and the rich environment that created a place to find community and heal. And so I think that was kind of my way into the work. When people ask me, how do you become a good therapist, or, kind of healer, whatever, I say, well, there's all the different trainings for sure. But, I think the key is like, suffer greatly, suffer greatly. right? And then number 2, survive. And number 3, learn to love again. So if you can do those 3 things, right, then I think that's half the battle. That's so much of the work, right? We can help people when we've walked through the terrain ourselves, right? And that's the deepest healing, yeah, and that's the deepest helping, I think, right?
That number 3 jumps out at me. I think of in NARM, we talk about heartfulness and how it's healing. You know, I think of it as like it's this bidirectional. When we're heartful, I feel like it's healing me to be in a heartful place. Yeah. And then I also can provide space and you know, that love can hopefully help in someone else's healing as well. So I love that you named that.
I love that phrase. I love that concept of heartfulness. You know, I think sometimes we think of mindfulness, right? It's like being aware of things. And then there's like kind of Christine Caldwell's beautiful term, bodyfulness, right? Like, which is like kind of like noticing our bodies. And I think kind of the idea of heartfulness is so rich, right? Because it evokes this different, like, here I am with you, connecting and in this relational space. And there's this other term which I really kind of have started to like. It's called relatedness, which is just this idea of, sometimes we think of the felt sense as something that happens just within my own being, but there's a feeling like there's a something that doesn't just live inside like my belly or my heart that feels open, but there's like, what's the felt sense here between me and you?
Yeah, here.
Like, what's the, yeah, exactly. The relate, yeah. And so there's this whole, what if we become kind of mindful or bodyful or even heartful towards the relational space, right? And we listen to the something in between, right? There's a feeling that happens in between two people, right? Kind of, and how do we listen for that too? So.
Oh, I love that. That is new to me. Did you come up with that?
That's cool. No. I can't take credit for that. It's,
that's beautiful. Which we'll talk about in a little bit, but I know you have an online program. And I know that the relational piece is a part of that. So I look forward to talking about that in a few minutes. But I wondered, you know, for me, so you talk about how, you know, your own background and kind of what brought you to the field. And so I'm wondering, you know, were there any moments that kind of jumped out at you as important kind of in that journey? Or, you know, do you have any kind of experiences or stories to kind of share that you feel would be useful for our listeners?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you what springs to mind. I mean, I remember not all the details, but like kind of at Esalen, they have this tradition where like they have something called open seat, where like people come and you sit and somebody sits with you and they basically kind of are with you and track you. And I think there were a couple moments where like the first time I tried to tune into my felt sense, it was like, nothing's happening. Okay. Right. It's like, that feels, and I felt so much shame, right, for failing, right? It's like, okay, I tried this thing. Everybody else is trying it. I did it. I failed. I went off in the corner. I was just flooded with intense shame. And okay, but I was kind of desperate, right? I came to Esalen with a mixture of hope and desperation. And then the next time I did it, I was sitting and you know, there was a strange invitation, just listen to your sensations and notice what it is. And there's this lump in my throat, right? And all of it, you know, and it was just kind of there. It's like, that's kind of peculiar. What the heck is that? There's this real lump in my throat. And then kind of just this gentle kind of classic invitation, like if this lump had a voice, what might it say? You know, and it's just like, and just even that question, and all of a sudden, like flooded with tears, right? Just the idea that there was somebody, or like nobody ever cares about what I feel or say, right? There's not, like my voice doesn't matter. It's just like almost this bizarre, strange overflow of tears, right? Just, and it was bizarre to me. It didn't make sense. And I remember, and I didn't understand it at the time, But, after the session, I think we were standing outside of, maybe it was Watts or Maslow. They named all the meeting rooms at Esalen after these famous kind of human potential people. And then John Soper wanted me to see him, right? It's like, I didn't understand why he wanted me to look at him. I didn't get it. There were tears in his eyes, right? Mm. And I guess, I think thinking back to that now, it's like, wow, why does he want me to look at him? Okay, so he has tears in his eyes, so what? Right, so what? And then I think, like, what's coming up right now is like, oh, he saw me, and his heart was with me, and he was with me and understood. And it's moving to me even now, just speaking and thinking about it. But I guess, yeah, there's something about kind of the relational part of that, the relating inside to feelings that kind of may have been isolated, exiled in whatever IFS language, kind of alone, but then also the exile of being separate and alone in the world, and then finding, here's a person who with me sees me and feels with me, and how not alone kind of that is, and how healing kind of just knowing that there's somebody with you kind of caring could be.
Wow. And what I'm really hearing you speak to is that the presence, right? Like how powerful and healing that presence is. And it sounds like he was present with you. He saw you.
What a beautiful man, very present. I carry him in my insides too now. And just the presence of, whether you call it heartfulness, you call it love, but just the idea of, like, love creating safety and safety making space for change, right? That's,
Say that again. So love creating safety and safety creating space for change.
Yeah, love creates safety, right? And safety makes space for change, right? And that's, I think, our primary task sometimes as kind of healers, helpers, therapists, clinicians, is to see the person with heartfulness, with love. Yeah. And then and people can, at least my story is like, feel that, right? And it's like, I'm here and you're still with me and you're still open. And that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing.
Thank you for sharing that experience with us. It sounds like it was a powerful one, and one that really kind of guided your direction. And
guided my direction, set me on my course, right? Guided my direction, kind of became at least a model through which I aspire to kind of return the favor. So, I'm just following the river, right?
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. I love that. Well, can you tell us more about the river? I don't know how much you want to say about your program, and we still have a little bit of time, but I want to give you some space to really talk about what it is that you're doing and the work and all of that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, that's really gracious. I mean, I think in some ways, the river, like, there's a real similarity between kind of the importance of relationality, kind of that the NARM model holds, that I feel kind of true in my heart and in the work that we're doing. There's this notion, I think kind of many of us in the field of somatics have come to this understanding that, like, trauma is stored in the body, right? It really is, right? There's things like the lump in the throat or whatever it might be that kind of happens. And the other thing that's really true is trauma is stored in the body, but revealed through relationship. It's almost like when I was at Esalen, and I talk about Esalen all the time. It's remarkable, I guess, anyways. But my fellow gate guard, I was, believe it or not, one of the Esalen gate guards were kind of like the bouncers of Esalen. But he used to say, well, what's the best workshop at Esalen? What's the best workshop? And we're always trying to kind of like figure out what the best workshop is. And he said, what the best workshop is? It's like, what is it? It's like, it's relationship. It's like being in relationship. It's like,
that's the workshop.
That's the workshop. That's the workshop, right? Like, because like, okay, like all of the things that you don't want to look at, you don't want to touch, like, oh my gosh, there they are, front and center. Like, I trusted before, but I was dropped before, and here I am. You want me to trust you? What? Right. I tried to protect myself before, saying, because I found it wasn't safe before, and now kind of you're pushing against me, and is it safe now? What? Right. And so there's this notion that kind of relationship is both something that activates us, that can heal us, and is where just all of the world starts to return, right? Like there's that old saying, like whoever comes to group, somehow your father shows up, right?
That saying is so true. I'll just say.
Yeah, absolutely. And the same is true, like kind of in the therapeutic, clinical kind of that relationship, right? It's like, here I am, and as I connect with you, all of the hopes, the longings, the goodness of it arises. And for those of us who've had complex trauma, the fears and the terrors and the history of what's happened kind of becomes relived in the present, right? And so how do you take both what is evoked and what is longed for and work with that to create, corrective relational moments of healing? What is the wound, right? And what is the relational possibility, right? How do we take the edge of what's scary, notice the acts of courage that a person makes at that edge, and help support them relationally on their way through? So that's the curriculum. I'm really delighted and pleased about our curriculum and our faculty. I could wax poetic about them, but they're some of people who I so deeply respect from the field of embodied relational practice and presence. And so if anybody's kind of inclined, I would for certain kind of welcome anyone who's out there and interested.
Wonderful. So you gave us kind of a snapshot of the program. And I know you've done lots of things. There's a whole list. Listeners probably already heard me fangirling about all your work in the beginning before we start having this conversation. But to tell me how you got into this specific, because you moved away from some other things to do this now. So I'm curious, what brought you to create this, I don't know, do you call it a program or a course or a training?
For sure.
How do you define it?
I used to run the Somatic program at John F. Kennedy, right? So I was happy to do that. When I was at Esalen, it's strange. It was a long time in coming, but I had this idea. Okay, I want to bring this to the world. I want to teach. I want to kind of, I love this, right? And so I ran the somatics program. We also built a trauma certificate program there. It was, actually, I had a conversation with Brad once, and we were like, Brad, you want to come on down and teach, right? Brad Cameron, right? So, and I think, he lives a little further up north, so it was hard to kind of figure out the arrangements. But anyways, we developed a trauma certificate program, and it was a beautiful thing. And I directed that program for a while. And then there was a moment that happened. And I think working institutionally, I think there's wonderful benefits, right? Because, you're affiliated with other people who kind of care about your mission, but also there's also some institutional constraints, and there's a moment, and this was really hard for me because I also want to credit Doreen Maller and Alvin McLean kind of really birthed the trauma certificate program there, kind of a labor of love and kind of a commitment to holistic experiential education in a domain that we felt was so important. There was a moment when they were going to shut it down. Well, it's long and complicated, but just, there was John F. Kennedy's institutionally affiliated with National University. John F. Kennedy was going to shift and become incorporated into. And so there was a way in which there was no, that's not okay, right? This is too important to fall or go gently into the night. And so, so in some ways, this program is like, okay, we need to save and keep what was precious and beautiful about that. And so a lot of the faculty who are in the program at Somatopia, the trauma certificate program at Somatopia, are kind of, drawn from like, okay, yeah, hey, let's do this. Let's if you don't like the news, go out and make some, right? So we're trying to kind of craft this and shape this, and it's really I will say, there's a lot of work on the back end, but it's also amazing and beautiful to see what's being born. So it's really an honor and a delight to shepherd this thing, Somatopia, right? Which is all about kind of this cross between, if we create a world where it's safe to be in our bodies, it would be a better place, right? If we can kind of create a world where I feel kind of connected inside me, you feel connected inside you, and sometimes maybe like in that, like if I'm really connected inside me in my body, it's too painful to hurt you, right? Because I will feel it inside myself, right? And so if we can just find our way back into feeling this soft belly that lives inside each of us, right? I think the world would be a better place. So.
Thank you for sharing it in that way. Again, your words. And I'll just say, I'm glad that listeners get to hear your voice most of this interview, because I've still got this raspy, I'm not sick anymore, but I've still got this raspy voice. But I just so appreciate the quality in which you communicate the work that you're doing and in talking about trauma. And I'm so glad that you continued forward your work and didn't let it kind of go into the dark night. You're continuing forward and doing that. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
So just wanted to say that.
There's something like the way that you listen, at least for me, like it's just, I thank you for being such an open heart.
Well, before we close, I wonder if there was anything else that you would like to share with our listeners, either in just something you've learned in your journey working through trauma, or as you've taught all the spaces that you've been. I want to give you an opportunity to share anything else that might feel on your heart or top of mind.
Just keep doing the work, right? Keep doing the work. We're all in it together, right? We're not alone, right? There are people, there are kind of podcasts like this. There's programs like NARM, right? Kind of there's communities, right? There's, kind of Somatopia if you're interested, but don't give up. Kind of there is hope, there is a way, and we'll make it through. Okay? So just keep trying.
Thank you. That's a lovely way to close. And so we'll make sure to get all those links in the show notes, listeners, if you would like to learn more about Albert and his work and what he's doing with Somatopia. You want to tell us what's your website? I was reading it here.
It's somatopia.com, right? That's the website. And
that's perfect.
Yeah. And it's interesting. It's kind of funny because my, and I don't know if you knew this, but my personal, I guess, private practice website is heartfulnesscounseling.com, which is kind of cool.
Oh, that's right. I did see that.
Okay. Yeah. So who knows? But yeah, I mean, Somatopia is probably the big one. So yeah.
Okay. Cool. Wonderful. Well, we'll put those links in the show notes. And again, my heart is so full. Thank you for joining us and for sharing a little bit more about how you've been involved in the field. And again, just so appreciative of the work that you've been doing that I've been following. I've been lucky to follow for some years now. And just grateful to have you here.
Oh, thank you for, such a lovely interview. Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more about our guest and their work, check the show notes or visit us at narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. Are you working with clients or populations dealing with the effects of adverse childhood experiences and complex trauma? If so, we invite you to consider joining us to become trained in the neuroaffective relational model in support of trauma-informed care. We are excited to offer psychoeducational and clinical trainings for a variety of mental health professionals. For more information on these NARM trainings and to apply, please visit www.narmtraining.com/schedule. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community, connection with you, and changing the world by transforming trauma.